but also of campaigning against prejudice and discrimination more broadly, and specifically in the context of South Africa and the development of what became known as apartheid. His parliamentary speeches are well worth revisiting, but his personal actions, not least in establishing a multiracial school for blind children, turned rhetoric into action, and therefore the reality of overcoming exclusion for those for whom words meant very little. I sincerely hope that this book gets wide exposure and people learn a little more about a man who deserves to be remembered and whose life should be celebrated. David Blunkett. Baron Blunkett represented the Sheffield, Brightside and Hillsborough constituency as Member of Parliament for 28 years. A genetic condition caused him to be blind from birth. He was well known in the House of Commons, accompanied by his black Labrador guide dog. Following the 1997 general election, he was promoted to the Cabinet, serving successively as Education and Employment Secretary, Home Secretary, and Work and Employment Secretary. He stood down from Parliament before the 2015 general election, and was awarded a peerage in the Dissolution Honours List. He was appointed Professor of Politics in Practice at the University of Sheffield in 2015. Preface. The principal subject of this book is a man who was a casualty of the First World War. After recovering from his injuries, he held notable and highly visible positions in public life. This was because he possessed great strength of character, which allowed him to overcome his severe disability. He graduated from Cambridge University with a law degree, and followed this by training as a barrister in the London law courts. On returning to South Africa, he had a distinguished career as an advocate and as a Member of Parliament, speaking out against racial discrimination and promoting the interests of disabled people. He achieved much in public service, working with other compassionate individuals on projects for the disabled. Many of these charitable projects were initiated and supported by the efforts of women. The man was Mike Bowen, and his transformation from a disabled war veteran into a powerful campaigner for human rights was enabled by a capable and determined woman. The woman's name was Lil Gillies, who married Mike soon after they met. She was always by his side, acting as his eyes. Lil supported Mike in his work to promote the interests of people who suffered discrimination and disability. Mike spoke out eloquently and passionately for those who had no voice or influence. The circumstances under which Mike and Lil met were neither auspicious nor romantic, but romance can blossom in the most unpromising settings. Their romance began in the ward of a London hospital, filled with soldiers who had suffered facial injuries, many of whom had been blinded. Mike was one of the blind soldiers. His eyes had been ripped out by a flying shard of red-hot metal from an exploding shell on the bloody, muddy battlefield known as Flanders Fields. Lil was a volunteer in one of the organizations established for women who wished to play a role in the war effort. She had been assigned to work in the rehabilitation facility for blinded soldiers, and was assigned to work with Mike on a one-to-one basis to teach him the skills required for reading and writing in Braille. The pupil-teacher relationship developed into deep affection, love, and marriage. Mike and Lil were the names by which the couple were known to family, friends, and colleagues. Their Christian names were Robert Walter Bowen and Eleanor Lily Gillies. Nicknames were often used in the family and by friends,